Yes, greetings. Very good evening to everyone who has joined. I'm so very happy to welcome you all to this yet another exciting session with the professor who needs absolutely no introduction, whether he or his school needs no introduction because the reputation, the amount of time and energy they have spent on the education sector is just incredible. On behalf of all my viewers out here, I extend my heartfelt welcome to Professor Peter Cappelli, the George W. Taylor Professor of Management, Director Human Resource of the Wharton School, and the Professor of University of Pennsylvania. And we have coined this, what a beautiful interaction today. We have coined this as what's the future of work really look like? That's a fantastic topic. This is absolutely a question everybody has in their mind in India, I'm sure across the globe as well, because of the kind of changes and the developments that we've been seeing post-COVID, I would say, which has been the new normal now. So this is a very right time that we're talking about this, while we're also seeing a lot of introduction of AI and a lot of technologies coming in place. This question is obvious. And I have a right person to talk about it, who represents the George W. Taylor Professor of Management, who also is one of the renowned faculty from Wharton long back, and is also called as industrial peacemaker, if I'm right. Such a pleasure and honor, Professor Peter. On behalf of all my viewers, faculty, students, and the top management of GIBS Business School, I'm extending a heartfelt welcome to you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Before we get into the subject, I would definitely like to know something about your early life, your initial days, and the way you got inclined towards the human resource and your journey in Wharton School. For all our viewers out here, it would be a great opening remarks from your end.
Well, I'm afraid it's not all that interesting. I was not a particularly good student in school. I think I was smart enough, but it was difficult for me to focus on my academic work. So I wasn't really oriented in this stuff until college, and I got a scholarship to go to Oxford in graduate school, and there I was studying inflation.
Mhm.
And as soon as I graduated, global inflation stopped being a problem. So I couldn't talk about that anymore. Nobody was very interested in that. I came back to the US. I had a fellowship at MIT, and the issue there were unions were starting to come apart in the US. So that's what I was studying there. And then unions did kind of come apart in the US, excuse me, and then there wasn't so much to talk about there. So I guess if you're an academic, it is relevant to understand that these issues do change, right? And that you have to adapt and do other things. So I was interested in public policy,
Mhm.
and I spent some time in the Reagan administration and then in the Clinton administration thinking about issues about the workforce as a whole and the skills issues in the workforce. And the lesson there was that what we were not paying enough attention to is the skills in the workforce were really driven a lot by what employers did. It wasn't that they just took a workforce that was delivered to them. They decided who to hire and whether to train people and whether to develop them internally or not. So those were the questions I was interested in. And that takes you back to what employers actually do. Now, the complication there is that that was not something that economists typically studied. The firm
Right.
was something they saw as a black box. And the problem was psychologists who did study that stuff were not very interested in what was actually happening. They were trying to figure out fundamental questions about your brain, and people in what was then the human resource function were kind of executing a pretty practical roadmap built around the assumptions they had about how companies worked. That all talent would be internal, that you could plan what the business was going to do years in advance, and internally, your job was simply to map onto that plan. And so lots of things have changed since then. The problem was the academic world took a very long time to catch on to that. So I was kind of on my own for a long period of time. It turns out now that sociologists are the people who have been most interested in these questions and the new developments, including things like AI. So in the academic world, people are interested in these things. It just has migrated from function and discipline to discipline to discipline. So I've been adapting, I guess I would say.
It's funny. So we have coined this as the future of, work life or workspace. So before we get into the future, this would be an apt question for you. Can we highlight something about the past, the present? Uh, how is the present different from the past? So let's try to understand this so that we can definitely talk about what's up in the future. How's that going in the US as a whole?
Yeah, no, I think that's the right way to think about these. It always helps to start at the beginning. And the
Mhm.
beginning of modern human resources practices starts in the US and it starts after World War II.
Right.
Before World War II, actually, things looked a lot more like they do now
Sure.
than they did after World War II. So before World War II, people used to move around a lot. Companies were not paying a lot of attention to develop talent, even management talent.
Mhm.
After World War II, what happened was we had kind of lost a generation of men. And that was because of the war. War went on for 3 or 4 years here, of course, India too. And the war was over. Suddenly the country is booming. The top leaders had stayed around during the war to keep running their businesses. And then they all died. So, like, literally a third of top executives died in office in World War II. So, you probably know the expression, what happens if the boss gets hit by a bus? I don't know if you've ever heard that expression about succession planning, but the reality was the bosses were all dropping dead from heart attacks and a third of them died in office. So the end of the World War II, what are we going to do? There were, nobody, not enough people in the management ranks. So that's when companies turned internally to think about developing their talent and all the practices that you think about now, 360 feedback systems, forced rankings, those were invented by the US Navy and the US Army during the war, internal promotion tracks, management development programs, rotational assignments, all that stuff came out of the military, and the US corporations built HR around those practices. A lot of that thinking persists. It's still in textbooks, but frankly, what changed after about 1981 recession, companies started to look outside for talent. They stopped developing talent internally. They found they couldn't plan very well. So we moved toward much more open labor markets, right? And careers advancing across them. So in the US right now, the average 50-year-old man has had 12 different employers. And after World War II, that answer would have been one. Even when I began my career, typical to have one for life. Now it's about 12 or so. So those are the big challenges. We've unbundled and stopped doing a lot of those practices from World War II. It still persists in textbooks. We still teach it in a lot of human resource programs, but the reality is it's kind of an open labor market, an open economy, and very, very different, right?
That's really great to note on that. Well, for those who have, not a part of the GIBS who's also watching this particular session, please note that this is one of the prestigious platform named IRE, which stands for Innovation, Research, and Entrepreneurship. And we have hosted numerous amount of people of the caliber of Professor Peter, who has taken his time out to spend some amazing time with all of us and the great learning in there. Professor Cappelli, you are also the part of the human resource of the Wharton School. You've seen the changes of being a part of the long time in this industry. You've been, being a part of this industry for a very long time. You've seen the new trends happening. While at this point of time, I would also like to know how is attrition managed in US?
How are they actually managing the current situation in the US?
Um, okay, can I also
Yeah.
take you back? How
Okay.
was attrition
Right.
before and how is attrition now? And do you find any major changes of attrition management before and now?
Well, I think the biggest change in the US is the role of vendors providing
Mhm.
the tools that companies use, right? So
Oh,
one
yeah.
of my students and I totaled up the size of the vendor industry and human resources that supports companies in human resource practices, just in human resource practice. And the value of that industry is $1.6 trillion. So
Mhm.
it is an enormous industry, and they're driving the agenda, right? So they decide through their marketing programs, they spend about 20% of their revenue of 1.6 trillion on marketing. And about 10% of that is kind of outreach. And to some extent, they solve problems, but they also create problems. To give you an example, something you hear a lot is this idea of generational differences in the workplace, right? That
Mhm.
idea was completely created by consultants and then vendors. There's no evidence that it's true, that there are different generations in the workplace. In fact, the US National Academy of Sciences did a study to look in to see what the truth was, and they said there's no evidence of different generations. There are different age groups, but there've always been different age groups in the workplace. So the downside of this is they spend a lot of time chasing problems that are not real. But I think the reality for companies and employers is that you have to manage vendors. You have to figure out which vendors are offering you tools that are useful, which
Mhm.
ones are selling you things where the benefits are exaggerated. Can they actually deliver what you want them to do? And what are the risks of buying your competencies as opposed to developing them internally yourself? You give up control to hiring, for example, which is the biggest maybe vendor space. You're not doing your own hiring anymore. What happens when you outsource it to a vendor who's deciding who you should hire? Well, one of the things that we're seeing right now in the US is the vendors, if they can't show that their practices are really valid, they get into legal trouble. And if you're using a vendor who's in legal trouble, you're in legal trouble as well. And that's
True.
happening right now in the US, right? So I would say that is the single biggest change that we've seen. And the skill of managing vendors is something we don't talk about very much, but we've got to get better at that.
Wow. Viewers, you should know we have picked up this very right topic because Professor Peter specialities, include in human resource practices, public policies related to employment, talent and performance management, and so on. He has been also the bestseller author of many of the books, and he's also the co-director of the U.S. Department of Education's National Center on post-secondary improvement at Stanford University as well. So it was indeed a pleasure connecting, and that's for the right topic that we decided to deliberate upon. Professor Peter, you gave us a fantastic view about how the human resource industry worked in the US in the past, in the present, right? Can you take us how difference you saw post-COVID scenarios in the US? And also at this point of time when there's a lot of geopolitical crisis happening, I'm talking about the war and the other things, which
Yeah.
has also led to the probable economic slowdown. Where do you see this industry going? And also seeing a lot of layoffs being happening in the US and other across the globe as well. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of confusion among the human fraternity over here,
Yeah.
right? So I really want to know the views on this.
Yeah, so let me talk about that and say that let's get to the topic of AI itself in just a minute because
Mhm.
that's the most important one. But I think what happened in the US with COVID is employers were quite surprised that remote work functioned as well as it did.
Mhm.
Uh, we had to send everybody home, as in India too, right?
True.
During COVID. And a lot of employers decided to keep employees remote in some way. One of the
Mhm.
things that you probably don't know, and in the US we don't pay attention to either, is that during COVID, the chief financial officers figured out that if you could keep employees home, you could cut your real estate budget by a lot. So inside companies, there has been a debate between the line managers who more or less want employees back in the office for lots of reasons, and the CFOs who would like to keep them out so that they could save real estate space. So that is certainly the biggest issue. That battle is still going on in the US. In India, I think lots more employers have brought everybody back, but in the US, not so much. So we still have, it's mainly large companies, mainly in big cities, but they have programs which are now called hybrid programs, which mean that you're back in the office a few days a week. The problem with that is that if you have actually cut your office space down, you can't get everybody back into the office at the same time anyway. So what we have got in lots of organizations with hybrid work is that people really are not seeing each other. And that might not be such a problem for people like me. So I've been at the Wharton School for 40 years. I know the building, I know the people. But what happens is you get new people coming in. And it doesn't take very long with a typical turnover rate before half your employees are new. And then you have a situation with sort of two cultures. You have people who were there before, who know each other. You have new people coming in who don't know each other. They don't know the older people. And it's quirky in ways which are a little hard to measure, but you can see the effects of keeping that running. That's the biggest thing. I think the other thing that happened post-COVID is that we walked back some innovations that we were starting to do before COVID. The most important of those was managing performance differently. So getting away from that 1950s exercise of performance appraisals once a year, you tick the box, you give people merit pay increase, you pretend to assess them, but in fact you can't really because, this is your only conversation during the year. And a lot of employers had moved away from that and started something much more sensible, which is continuous conversations with employees about how they're doing rather than a once in a year exercise. A lot of employers walked that back during COVID and after COVID, especially because it was just easier to do. And it seemed just too hard, right, to try to do that, I think. So we've walked that back, which is not a good thing. I would say at the moment, to the extent to which there is a prominent issue in human resources that is not AI driven, it is this issue of remote work. The line managers, increasingly the CEOs, want people to come back. The CFOs don't because they want to save office space and cut costs in that sense. So that's the biggest thing. But now we should talk about AI because that's probably the issue that's on most people's mind.
Well, I wanted to ask you this question. I had this question in my mind long back, but today I found the right person to ask about it. So while you
Okay.
spoke about remote work or work from office or hybrid, what, according to you, is the productivity level? Where is it high? You find the productivity level high at work from home or
Yeah.
work from office, work in the office?
Yeah. Well, there are conflicting points of view on this, but we should say that these studies are almost all looking at individual contributors.
Correct.
And if you're an individual contributor, you probably don't really need to be around other people much anyway, right? So the most prominent examples of this, which were done before COVID, were studies on patent attorneys who have always worked alone. These are government employees who decide whether you should get a patent or not. And they're lawyers, basically, and they work by themselves. And some call center employees who work by themselves as well. And those studies started to showed that people could perform better, and you could get real estate savings, of course, if they were not in the office. Now, the limitation is those are quite unique jobs. And we're also looking at people who are already trained and are already doing the job pretty well. So, one of the things that we are now starting to see is other studies also looking at individuals, including at call center jobs, showing that they perform worse. Now, why is that? Well, those studies have been done post-COVID, not pre-COVID. And to some extent, they're looking at slightly different things, like the extent to which people help each other. So our work on this, we wrote a book about this called The Future of the Office. And we were looking at the workplace per se, not a particular job, but how employees interact with each other. And what you can see there, which won't surprise you, is it's harder for people to learn, especially new hires, if there's nobody around for them to watch or ask questions or talk to.
Correct.
If when you need help, you have to ping someone on Slack and wait for them to get back to you with an answer, it just doesn't work quite as well. So what we discovered in our study, which included coming to India and looking at some locations in India, is that people have shifted their focus to look more at their own tasks, the ones that the company is measuring, as opposed to work that they may have always done just because it seemed like the right thing to do. So you're a new employee, you're coming, you're sitting near me, you look confused, I go over to help you. I don't
So
do that anymore because I
is
don't
that a
see.
right approach?
Well, if you want those people to learn and you don't see they don't see anybody else around, then you have to say, okay, if we want remote work, how can we make that happen? And that's been the problem is for the most part, companies are not dealing with that issue, right? How do we help people learn? How do we get them to cooperate with each other when they don't see each other and they don't know each other anymore? If I have a problem with you before we were in the office, I would probably just go to your office, stick my head in and say, what's happening here?
Correct.
Now what happens is we do this by email, and sometimes it gets more and more aggressive because it's just harder to be nice to people if you're not seeing them, or it's easier not to be nice. And it takes longer to solve the problem. So could we make this work? You could, but at the moment we don't seem to be trying. So that's the downside of remote work. People like it better. If you're starting out in a job, it's harder to learn. And we haven't figured out how to help people learn, how to help people cooperate and work together in office jobs where it really does matter that you're not working by yourself.
That's lovely. There's another specific reason why I asked you this question about the productivity. The reason is once the companies decides to go for a complete work from home options, what is that is there in their mind? Is that the cost factor that is in the mind or the productivity factor in the mind?
Well, it's not the productivity factor. It's first, startup companies often do this because they don't have any money for offices. The second reason is they have people they would like to hire who seem maybe in their network, they already know them,
Mhm.
and maybe they just seem somehow to be the right people who are not nearby. And they don't have the money or the ability to relocate them. And maybe the people don't want to leave because these days jobs don't last very long. Companies are not relocating people very much at all in the US. So you work remotely because that's the way to get the people. So those are the two reasons that they're doing that. But having said that, there aren't that many companies that are operating completely remotely. They're mainly smaller companies. They're mainly tech companies. And of the famous ones that are well known, one of the things we know about them is they have lots and lots of rules about how you have to deal with each other, rules that you don't see in a regular office context. And these are rules about forcing you to collaborate, forcing you to be transparent about everything you're doing. Does it work as well? I don't think we know whether it works as well. So the answer to your question, no, they're not doing it because it's more productive. They're doing it because it's cheaper and it's the only way for them to get the people that they want to get, at the very least at the price they're willing to pay. One of the things we saw, and you have this in India too, right, is that um, these new companies develop in areas where there are already lots of talent. So people generally don't start up companies in the middle of nowhere, right? They start them in the US in Silicon Valley, or if you're in biotech on the East Coast between Philadelphia and Boston, right along that corridor. So because people are nearby, right? So that's the problem they're trying to solve.
If I can ask you this question at this point of time, taking the discussions further of the previous question. At this point of time in the companies, maybe in the US or across the globe, considering all the situations that is going on around, is talent acquisition a real challenge or a talent retention is a real challenge?
Well, I would say retention is the more obvious one that you could fix.
Mhm.
And there's a really fascinating statistic from the company ADP. They do payroll processing here, and maybe they're in India as well. They're certainly the biggest one. They do it for 80 million employees in the US, which is amazing. It's almost half the US workforce. And I calculated a little while ago that I think it's only about 1% of US employees get a promotion in a typical year. So another thing we used to see is that companies had lots more promotion opportunities. Um, and this is how you advanced in pay and in your career. So only 1% get them now. But the amazing statistic they conclude is that 29% of people who are promoted in the US quit within a month.
Oh,
Now, that
interesting.
is astonishing, right? So, how could that be? Well, you might say one of the reasons is the companies see that somebody is ready to quit, so they promote them, but they already leave. Or it could be, now the other thing is something that's called dry promotions, and that is they promote, but then they say to the person who just got promoted, you get the new title, congratulations. We'll adjust your pay next year, right?
I
So
wanted to
that
ask you
means
that question. So whether
right,
the promotion is only the designation change, or do you have the change in the salary as well
right. So what the companies do is they say, we'll get your pay increase next year.
next year?
And this is something that's cost focused. And of course, it's the British expression, penny wise and pound foolish. You're saving a little money on their salary, but they quit. And one of the things that I've been trying to make people aware of is that there are problems on the finance side of business, and this is in part because of accounting issues. So the CFO looks at this and they say, well, yeah, look, we saved this salary increase for a whole year. And you say, yeah, but the person quit. And they say, well, I don't see that cost anywhere, right? So it just looks like I'm saving money to me. And the reason is financial accounting has no line item for turnover cost. It's buried in various parts of performance measurement, in recruiting, and other sorts of places. So the CFO could trip along happily thinking they're saving money. It's costing the company in a huge way to do this, but the CFOs never see it because they never see those cost issues. So we have that going on to a huge extent in the US now.
Considering the challenges that you just mentioned about talent retention, can I ask you this question? What is Professor Cappelli's top strategies to retain the best talent?
Well, it's about giving people more opportunities, right? So, I mean, you can't underpay people for long, or they will leave, but you have to give them opportunities to grow and develop, excuse me, in advance. And we've been very bad at that. And that's something that's gotten worse in the last 20 years.
Right.
So, after the dot-com boom in the year 2000, 1999, 2000, and we started to see the creation of job boards. The first one in the US was monster.com.
Yes.
And what you could do then is you could look on this job board and see jobs posted across the entire country. You could apply online, you could find a job, you could actually be hired, in a day or two. So companies said, oh my God, we're losing all these people. What do we do? And they smartly said, we should make it easier for people to find a new job inside our own company rather than have them feel they need to quit the company altogether to find a new position or to get away from a current boss I don't like, right? So they decided to say,
Right.
okay, we're going to create these internal systems of job posting. So our vacancies are posted, employees internally could apply for it. It worked really well. Companies like Dow Chemical, which I looked at the time in some detail, they cut their turnover rate in half by putting in place this model. So, what is not to like? Well, here's what happened. In a lot of companies, particularly after the Great Recession when no one was quitting, the line managers began to push back and say, look, I don't want Peter to go to this other job in the company. I really need him here to finish what he's doing. It'll really hurt me if he leaves. And the human resource people would say, yeah, but it's going to hurt even the company even more if he leaves the company because we won't let him change jobs. But the line managers don't see that cost. They just see their own costs. So they were pushing back. And so what happened was companies restricted the ability to move internally to make the line managers happy. They did it in a simple way. You need your boss's approval to apply for another job inside our company. Now, once you do that, it shuts the market down, right? Because I don't want to tell you, my boss, I'd like to work for somebody else. The boss is not going to like that. And what if I don't get that job? Then I'm stuck with you still as a boss, but you know I don't want to work for you. So people don't even apply, right? So that's been the big change. We made things worse. It's not that hard to fix, but it's another problem, another example of something which is good for the organization as a whole, but it's bad for the individual managers. And so because of that, we're making a mistake that hurts the company. So retention, you want to fix retention, fix that problem.
Professor Cappelli, your expertise also lies in performance management as well. Is this wrong if I say performance management at times, the process, the system is not employee friendly? What is your views on this?
Well, we've made it a big bureaucratic exercise, right? Of just end of the year appraisal of an employee. This is partly because executives feel, I think, wrongly that money is what motivates everybody. Because that's how we manage executives. At least in the US, it's all managed by compensation, stock
Okay,
options, bonus pay, do this
right.
much, you get this bonus, drive shareholder value up to here, you get this stock options become this much more valuable. And I think that's the way we manage them, so that's the way they manage other people. But employees are managed by other things, motivated by things that aren't just money, especially because the amount of money we're going to give them is nowhere near life-changing the way it is for top executives, right? So human interaction matters a lot to regular employees. And we need more of that. So supervisors need to be better at
Correct.
managing employees. And that means paying attention to what motivates them, trying to give them assignments which maybe interest them or stimulate them more, and motivate them more, right? So that's the direction we were moving before COVID, but then COVID things started to slow down, right? And back up now.
So you mean to say the performance management system, of course, is all about interacting with him at the end of the year, let's say 365th day. How often you recommend the supervisors should interact with their team in the 12 months period of time so
Well,
that they are on
yeah.
the right path?
Right. So here's what we mean by interaction. It just means you stop by my desk and you say, Peter, that presentation you did, I thought that was really nice. Here's the part you should think about. So in the moment, giving people feedback. That's what it means. It doesn't mean weekly performance appraisals, right? It doesn't mean multiple performance
Right.
appraisals, which is what we have started to see instead in the US. And maybe meeting 4 times a year is better than only once a year, probably true. But what we really want is in the moment conversations, right? And more of them. Part of the reason for that is the more you have, the easier it is for the employee to take. If I only talk to you once a year, you
Correct.
really are nervous and focused on that conversation. And I can't
True.
do a good job of describing all the things over the year that you did well or things you need to improve, right? I can't even remember them. So it's become a kind of tick the box exercise for supervisors. We know what you should do, but the companies don't want to make people do it, partly because it is such a change and partly because the top leaders don't think that way. I
True.
should say, however, 50 years ago, that is how we managed employees, and that is what we made supervisors do. Big corporations, for example, used to assess your performance based on things like how many stretch assignments, learning opportunities you gave your direct reports. They wanted you, for your performance appraisal, to tell the bosses, here's what I gave Peter to do to stretch him. Here's what I gave Guru to do to stretch him. Here's what we gave Harbir to do to stretch, point by point, holding supervisors accountable. We don't do any of that stuff. So guess what? They don't do it.
So considering the points that you mentioned, what would be Professor Cappelli's advice to the top executive or the top leaders, especially in performance management system of their employees? What would be your best
Well,
advice?
okay, that so go back to do that. So just ask all your supervisors. That's a simple thing
Right.
that does not take much time to just ask them at the end of the year to say, how did I develop each of these employees? What did I do? And I
Mhm.
think actually it would be better for the supervisors because now we have to try to make up things that we could say about Peter or Guru because they wanted in the performance appraisal, but I can't remember what you did over the course of the year. So a specific questions for the supervisors, that would help a lot. And if you're a top executive, it's easy to do. So just ask them to add that to the performance appraisal.
Great. So considering we had a fantastic deliberations on the past, the present. So now the big question is what lies in the future? All the ongoing issues, post-COVID scenarios, advent of technologies, geopolitical issues. Where do you see this human industry going a decade down the line?
Well, I think at the moment there is so much attention being given, excuse me, to AI, right?
Right.
And so much of it has been simply wrong, right? And the reason is initially when something like technology comes out, new technology, you're listening to the people who build the technology and frankly sell it to you. And they tell you what it is possible for the technology to do because that's what's exciting. You may remember in the late 2010s, we were fascinated with driverless cars. And in the US, the prediction was that by 2019, robots would be driving all trucks.
Right.
And this was so credible to people that companies were putting in place programs on how to deal with their unemployed truck drivers, right? Well, it turned out it was completely wrong. We don't have anything like driverless trucks now, 10 years later. And the reason is because we were listening to what was possible, not what was practical. And I think with AI, that's what we're seeing now. So that's what I've been looking at is companies that are actually introducing AI. What do you see, right? And the answer is first, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of effort from human resources to figure out. Let's think about large language models, for example. How do we insert an agent like ChatGPT or any of them into the workflow? Okay. That means I've got to figure out first, what is the workflow? So in our department, here's what they want us to do. Here's what we deliver at the end. What happens in between? And one of the things I noticed is in the few places where they actually think this through, they can really improve performance. They could improve performance without using AI, simply because they haven't thought about that workflow in some cases ever. And they see things that are redundant or they see things that don't make sense. And I've seen at least one really good example where performance increased enormously because of the introduction of AI, but it was really thinking through the workflow. The second thing you've got to do is for each employee in that workflow, you have to do what HR would say a job analysis. You got to figure out what does that person do in each of those jobs, and then where could we insert an agent? And you need that employee to help you do it. So think about what we're talking about here. AI, what's the practical problem? It's organizational change, and it all centers around human resource issues. Can we find where agents could be inserted? Can we get employees to help us do it? Can we then get them to continue to monitor the agent and manage it, right? So it's all HR stuff. So the question about HR is, will HR embrace this and try to lead it, or will somebody else end up doing it? I think what we're seeing now is the AI companies are realizing they don't know how to do this. The actual introduction of AI is incredibly slower than you would think. The number of companies doing is really small. The job losses are fake, basically. There's no evidence of companies really losing jobs from this. And frankly, thinking about AI as something that will cut headcount is a huge mistake. You should be thinking about what it could do to solve new problems for you, what it could do to solve existing problems that you've never tried to solve before. So think about HR for a minute. We are awash in data that we never look at. Why? Because it's been really hard to look at the data. AI tools are good at looking at that data and analyzing it for you. You could spend a lot of time trying to automate individual jobs, but here's the conclusion at least we reach. You automate a simple job like a call center employee, okay? The first thing is those jobs don't pay much money, so you don't save much money when you automate them. The second is those jobs are often a lot of yes, no questions. Is this call about this problem or that problem? Those are not large language model problems to solve. Those are machine learning problems where they have to be trained on the data. Those are quite expensive to do. So it turns out this view we heard that all simple jobs will be automated is not turning out to be true. Financially, it's expensive to do. It doesn't save you much money. The big benefits come from the large language models, adding white collar work solutions.
Of course, AI is going to rule, AI is going to be the future. We all agree to the fact. But if I were to ask you this question, artificial intelligence versus natural intelligence, what would be the Professor Peter's pick?
Well, if you look at cases where you introduce AI and it's really worked, successful, what you see is it's very good at summarizing what we already know, right? So the cases that are the most inspiring, if you're a fan of AI, are in situations like healthcare, right? Where AI tools can read
Totally
X-rays,
Putri, more general.
they can read X-rays really well. Okay. Uh, that's really great. It turns out it does not eliminate the jobs of radiologists, which is what they were telling us years ago. The use of radiologists has actually gone up. They become an aid to a radiologist who looks at what AI says, but then looks at it themselves to figure out what the right answer is. So I don't think when we say AI is intelligent, what it really is good at is summarizing what we know, organizing it, and drawing conclusions based on what we already know. But it's not good at thinking about, okay, where else and what could we do new? And where else could you use my tools? Somebody has to figure that stuff out. The introduction of this stuff is going to be slow and requires a lot of effort. Look back in other operations. So if you look back, you're probably not old enough to remember before search engines. But search engines were a huge innovation. Before a search engine, if you wanted to know the answers to problems, you had to go to a library. You had to open up books of indexes. You had to find keywords, go down, find the keywords, then find what articles mentioned this. Then you had to go into the library and climb up, find that article in paper, and then try to read it and figure out what it said. After search engines, boom, press a button, you can get these answers. Most people who are using AI now are just using it as an even better search engine. But when you think back on search engines, there's no story about search engines leading to layoffs. The story is all about how search engines allowed us to do new things, including creating new companies, including creating entire new industries. That's, I think, the story about AI too. We've been so focused on it cutting headcount because that appealed to financial analysts and to CFOs. But the harder thing and the better thing is new solutions to new problems.
Do you also predict companies going away from typical brick and mortar to the complete digital mode in the coming years?
I'm sorry, to which models now?
Brick and mortar, the brick and
Brick and
mortar
mortar.
model, which is a physical appearance to a complete digital mode.
Well, I don't know that AI has an effect on that per se. That is sort of a little more still the remote work story. There's a lot of stories about technology in the past where the results did not look at all like what we thought. So, for example, automated teller machines. I mean, in India, you folks are well past this, but where you go to a bank and you stuck your card in to get cash rather than go to the teller. And they said, well, this will wipe out tellers in banks. It turned out after that, the number of tellers actually went up because they found that there were other things that tellers could do that would be useful besides simply handing out cash to customers. So I don't think that it's obvious that AI will reduce the importance of bricks and mortars. It's just like what we thought would happen with education, right? That it would all go online. But it turns out it's very hard for people to learn online. And they're really motivated as humans by being around other people. So brick and mortar institutions in higher education were not destroyed by the use of online education. And I don't think AI is going to change that either.
Hopefully.
Yeah, for us. Although I'm getting ready to retire, more of a problem for you.
So to summarize or to conclude, is it what you meant was end of the day in the future would be man versus machine?
I think the future is something that we have to manage, but the change process for technology is slow, but we also have choices. When we introduced in the blue collar world automated machinery and computer guided tools, we always had questions about, okay, who's going to program the tool? Will it be the machinist who already works with the tool, or will it be an engineer and then we lay off the machinist? Well, there's a choice there. And, in some cases, it made a lot more sense to have the machinist do it. And you could see national differences. So in Europe, for example, they were much more inclined to train the local person. In the US, we were much more inclined to use engineers. These are choices that are driven a lot by what goes on inside the leaders' heads. And what we could do a lot better with is educate the leaders to think more about management and less about engineering, right?
Right.
So our leaders in the US now are 30% engineers in terms of training. Nothing wrong with that, except we're not being trained as managers much.
Right.
They've just got engineers trying to think about these all as engineering problems rather than management problems.
Professor Cappelli, this session of yours is viewed by a lot of students, especially the master students who will be out for the corporate world very soon, which is all about the new work style that we were talking about. What would your advice be to these students um, to face the the new challenge that's going to come in front of them? What would be a piece of advice for them?
Yeah, I think if you have a choice, what you're trying to figure out is what kind of employers look like they're interested in change and would find that interesting to do. Younger people are more interested in change because they don't have a stake in the older models, right? So I think that would be the interesting places that I would like to go if I were in their position right now. What kind of companies look like they want to try to do new things and are open to it? And what kind of, particularly if I'm ambitious, what kind of companies look like they offer opportunities for people to learn and advance? So I would ask those questions about career advancement and the ability to move around inside the companies. Because I think that's where you really can learn, especially if you're ambitious. It's also where you can really grow and develop.
That's lovely. Or a last piece of advice to a certain set of students who would love to start their own business venture.
Yeah.
How do you expect them to manage their workforce? Basically, the human resource management. What are the
Yeah.
tips that you want to give them for the startups they want to start tomorrow?
Yeah, so I used to teach an entire class on this. And, one of the problems is with a startup company is that at different stages, you need quite different things.
Right.
And part of the problem is that the founders are often really good at one stage, usually the first stage, and that is just finding smart people. They're so motivated by starting the company that you don't have to manage them very carefully, right? They want to succeed because they will get rich or they will get famous or whatever. That part, we understand how to manage that. What happens next is you have to professionalize your management once they start to get a little bigger. So particularly by the time you hit maybe 15, 20 employees, you need help. You need some systems in place. You need practices, and you need help. So don't forget that. The company is going to look quite different if you succeed, and you can't manage it the way you did when it was a startup.
Lovely. I mean, the objective or the impact that we wanted to create out of this session, I would very boldly and very honestly mention you that is 100% met. It was indeed a pleasure hosting a profile like yours. A lot of questions, a lot of confusions around considering the situations. This has come at a very right moment. And the every questions that we picked on behalf of the students was very well aligned, and the answers were real bang on. So it was a great, I would say, takeaways for all of us who are watching. And I'm also happy to mention that, we would be uploading this session in our official YouTube channel very soon. And we will also be sharing it to across the student fraternity of the country. So it's a great learning for all of them, because we don't believe anything in keeping and private, in education, it's all about sharing, and knowledge sharing is something that's the biggest noble cause that you do. So we'll be very happy and honored to upload this so that it can be accessed by a lot of students out there and they have their own set of takeaways. Professor Cappelli, I'm really falling short of words to thank you, because you started your early morning, spending your time with us, with my students. I'm so glad on behalf of my entire GIBS team, fraternity, students, faculties, and top management. Let me extend my heartfelt thank you for the wonderful time that we had. Have you visited India before, Professor Cappelli?
Many times. In fact, my colleagues and I wrote a book about India that you may have seen at some point called The India Way, about the distinctiveness of Indian business management and leadership. And actually, we were quite impressed. I think, to be honest, I think it was better than what you see in the US. The leaders seem to understand management better in India than they do in the US.
I take the point. Any plans in the upcoming days to visit India again?
No. A lot of things dropped off after COVID and programs and have not quite come back again. So we hope they'll develop
Let's
again.
let's let GIBS create some opportunity for you to come down.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Professor Cappelli. I wish you a great day ahead. And yes, I certainly wish to host you one day in our campus so that we can have a great enriching interaction with students and with the faculties. But otherwise, it was so pleasure and honor to have hosted you for today's talk. Thank you so much for being a part.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Right. Catch you soon. Thank you. So, viewers, I extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for your patience listening and for being part of this wonderful interaction. If you haven't subscribed us, you can please go and do that in all the social media platforms, GIBS Business School and GIBS IRE Talks. Thank you so much for now. This is Professor Guru Prasad signing off, and thank you for watching.